Hello, my name is Janet Benini, and I'm a career-long emergency manager who works for the U.S. Department of Transportation. I very much wanted to be with you at the International As-Is Asia-Pacific Forum, but unfortunately that was not possible. So the organizers graciously allowed me a few minutes to talk with you electronically about a program I'm leading that I think and hope may be of interest to you. This project is called Improving Supply Chain Resilience in the APEC area, and it has to do with ways that our interconnected nations can work together to minimize the impact and recover from disasters. It is led by the United States through the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, or APEC. In the United States, we've known for a long time that disasters are bad, not only for communities and impacted people, but they're also bad for businesses. In fact, our U.S. Department of Labor has determined that nearly half of all businesses in our country that have to close because of a disaster are never able to reopen. And even those that do manage to get started again, nearly a third of them go under within the next 2 years. This is a horrible record, not only for the families that own and operate those companies, but also their customers and the employees who worked there, and for the communities as a whole. But it took us emergency managers quite a while to realize that we've not been looking at the whole picture. In fact, like the lady in this slide, in a way we had only been seeing the top of the iceberg. There was this smart guy who lived in the last century who taught the world a thing or two. His name was Albert Einstein. And one of the things he taught us is that we can look at the universe as a series of particles or as a series of waves of energy, but we can't think of both at the same time. So we emergency managers kind of got stuck thinking of the world as particles, especially people like me in transportation. We like to design and build and think of the world as infrastructure, highways, bridges, ports, airports, and things like that. But I'm proposing to you, fellow emergency managers, that now we really should start thinking of waves. And economically, that means the supply chain. Once we started to see things from this perspective, our eyes opened up. For example, if you remember the Iceland volcano of 2010, and I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce its name, you'll remember that this relatively minor event impacted not only the ponies nearby that are shown in this photo, but also air passengers throughout Europe, auto assembly plants on 3 different continents, rose growers in Kenya, and in fact manufacturing worldwide. This really made us at the U.S. Department of Transportation start thinking in another way. We began to look into supply chains and how they can be impacted by disasters. It didn't take long for a couple other great examples of this problem to surface. Here's a slide demonstrating the supply chains needed for making hard drives in Thailand. As you can see, there are components from throughout the world involved in manufacturing these hard drives, which themselves are then used to make just about everything else we use. So, bingo, let's give Thailand a flood, like happened in 2011. Well, since Thailand is the #2 producer of hard drives in the world, when you take them out of the market, even for a short time, the result is a 30% drop in the global production of hard drives. As you can see from this slide, it had an impact on at least 9 separate economies and was a huge loss for the countless public and private organizations that rely on these drives to keep their production lines moving. What else happened in 2011? Well, you may remember the great earthquake and tsunami that occurred in Japan. And despite the tremendous physical damage, including to the companies and the buildings, it wasn't the damaged structures that were the reason for the closing of 90% of the businesses that went bankrupt. They went out of business due to indirect losses or damage, including disrupted supply chains. So now, Mr. Einstein, despite what you said, we know we can't just think of particles or waves. Supply chains are disrupted because the infrastructure is damaged. But instead of just thinking the particles that replace the bridge, repair that port, if we also consider the waves or the supply chains, it helps us to broaden our horizon when setting priorities. Maybe a temporary fix here can help keep the economy going while we're developing a more permanent solution there. Now, just to do a little reality check, our team decided to look from the opposite perspective into what does disrupt supply chains. And sure enough, according to the World Economic Forum, the largest problem for supply chains is natural disasters. So we knew we were on to something. Well, Mr. Einstein, how do we even begin to address an issue that's so widespread? Well, it doesn't hurt to take a look at what other people have done. And sure enough, we found out that the Geneva-based World Economic Forum had recently paid attention to supply chain and transport risks. Their risk response network came up with 5 primary recommendations in a 2012 white paper following a lengthy and broad-based research effort. Here they are. I've highlighted the ones that involve government and businesses working together, because as you've probably figured out by now, that is where I'm heading with this presentation. And as you can see, the number 1 recommendation is to work together internationally to improve the compatibility of resilience standards and programs. The other recommendations also focus on communications and coordination throughout the supply chain network. And the final recommendation is to improve pre- and post-event communications on systemic disruptions in public and private discussion. Next, our team wondered where was a good place to start to address these issues where we could make an impact. What group or groups should we approach? We chose APEC, the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Organization. Because APEC represents 21 economies rather than countries, we knew we were onto an organization that already thinks in waves instead of particles. As you can see from this map, APEC represents both a large part of the world's economy and also a disproportionately large part, in fact 70%, of the world's natural disasters. We may be a multinational group, but clearly we speak the same language when it comes to championing the resilience of our global supply chain. Let's fast forward a bit. US DOT and a broadening coalition are about to begin in 2015 our 3rd year of work with APEC. From our initial proposal in 2013 until now, APEC has been very supportive and encouraging of the work on supply chain resilience. In fact, this topic was even highlighted in the leader statement at the APEC meeting in China last month. Through this work, we've developed the APEC 7 Principles of Supply Chain Resilience. As you can see, they're not earth-shattering, but they do serve to focus our efforts. Number 1 is to share information. The second principle involves a better understanding of the risks to the supply chain. It's also important that both companies improve their resilience, in principle number 3, and the government adopts regulations and policies to promote supply chain resilience, principle number 4. We need to work in a regional way, number 5, protect critical infrastructure, number 6, and recognize best practices, number 7, so we can learn from each other's experiences. It's a multifaceted issue requiring cooperation of several groups and interests. Government, businesses, disaster preparedness, and infrastructure planning are all involved, and supply chain resilience cuts across all of them. We're fortunate to have partnered early with the U.S. State Department and the Agency for International Development, or USAID. In fact, unusual in this budget climate, USAID has made a 5-year commitment to support APEC supply chain resilience. Although APEC matching funds are dedicated on a year-by-year basis, so far our project has been very highly ranked in the competitive APEC process, and we're confident that APEC will also continue to support us for at least 5 years. This gives us the stability to take on some projects that could really make a difference. So we're planning to eat this apple one bite at a time. First, for each of the next 5 years, our team will focus on one of the APEC developing economies and work with them to develop an action plan for supply chain resilience. We will work with their supply chains, their manufacturing base, their government systems, and the companies that work there. In fact, organizations that invest in that economy, including not only USAID, but also the United Nations and the World Bank, are enthusiastic about cooperating. Our first year will be 2015, and our first economy is the Philippines. The projected date for the workshop in the Philippines is October, and there's a lot of work to do to build up to that meeting. I'm hoping some of your companies that work in the Philippines will want to join us. Second, for each of the next 5 years, we'll also focus on one of the APEC principles of supply chain resilience, inviting participants from all of the 21 APEC economies to a workshop to explore that principle and develop action plans for their economy based on it. For 2015, the principle we've chosen is risk and hazard mapping of supply chains. We think this workshop will probably be in the spring and probably in Peru. We found some good examples and we're trying to learn about more. One of them comes from the Logistics Institute of the University of Singapore, and you'll be hearing a little about this at another point in the program. Maybe your company has a good system for risk and hazard mapping, and we'd be interested in your sharing information too. So, the supply chain resilience snowball has been gathering organizations as we've rolled along. It started with an idea from U.S. Department of Transportation, and we partnered with U.S. Agency for International Development in our approach to APEC. APEC wholeheartedly embraced this work, and now we've garnered support from the OECD in Europe, the United Nations, and the World Bank. I'm here today, or at least I'm kind of here today, to ask for your support, the international as-is and your individual member companies. We know you've been working on supply chain resilience issues too. We've learned about your CSO Roundtable and your Supply Chain Resilience Leaders Group. We ask you now to join this growing community of security and resilience planners, trying to tackle this paramount economic issue. By working together as waves, not particles, we can help the interconnected businesses, economies, and communities we all serve. I'd like to thank you for your attention, and thank you and As Is International for allowing me to be here with you in a virtual way. At this point, I would love to be able to respond to your questions and your comments and have individual conversations with many of you, so we could exchange business cards and follow up later. But since that's not possible, I'm going to ask you to reach out to me. I promise I'll respond, and I'll keep you posted on our activities. I'll add you to our distribution list so we can communicate, and I'll also schedule a conference call with you in the near future. I look forward to learning from you about your challenges, your successes, and your ideas for collaborating. Here is my contact information. Thanks again, and goodbye for now.